Chicago, October of 2024. The cold wind cut through the streets of Michigan Avenue on that gray autumn afternoon. Michael Jordan walked alone, something rare for a man of his stature. At 61 years old, he had learned to value these moments of anonymity. The cap pulled down low, the discreet jacket, nothing that screamed basketball legend. Just a man returning from yet another business meeting. But as his footsteps echoed on the concrete, his mind was far away. He had just signed another $1 million contract. More zeros in his bank account. More recognition. And yet, that empty feeling would not abandon him. 6 NBA championships. Billionaire entrepreneur. Global icon. But for what? For whom? That was when he saw him. Sitting on the street corner, huddled against the brick wall of an old building, was a man. Thin, grizzled beard matted and unkempt. Dirty and torn clothes. A thin blanket over his shoulders trembling. Just another homeless person in a city full of them. Michael did what most people do. He lowered his eyes and continued walking. Michael. The voice was low, almost a whisper. But something in it made Michael stop. Michael Jordan. He turned slowly. The man was not looking at him. He was looking at nothing, with glassy eyes, lost somewhere distant in time. I helped you. Do you remember? Michael felt something strange in his chest. How many times had he heard this? People saying they knew him, that they had done something for him. Usually they wanted money, or attention, or both. But there was something different about that voice, something familiar that he could not identify. How do you know me? Michael asked, moving closer. The man finally raised his eyes. They were tired eyes, marked by years of suffering. But they were also lucid eyes, aware. You do not recognize me, do you? The man smiled sadly. Of course you do not. I was different. We both were. Michael crouched in front of him, studying that aged face marked by life on the streets. The man appeared to be about 70 years old, perhaps more. There was something that touched an old memory, buried under decades of fame and glory. What is your name? Michael asked, feeling his heart accelerate. Robert Mitchell. The man paused, watching recognition begin to appear in Michael's eyes. I was your history teacher at Laney High School, and I was the one who convinced Coach Herring to give you a chance on the junior team. The world stopped. Michael felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Laney High School, Wilmington, North Carolina, 1978. The year that changed everything. The year he was cut from the varsity team for being too short. The year that lit the fire that transformed him into a legend. But Professor Mitchell? The young history teacher who always had words of encouragement? Michael looked at the man before him again. Behind the beard, the dirt. The years of hard life on the streets he began to see. The same gentle eyes, in spite of everything. The same shape of the face. My God, Michael whispered. Professor Mitchell, what happened? Michael sat down on the sidewalk next to Robert, completely ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. Some people slowed their pace, recognizing Michael Jordan sitting on the ground with a homeless man. But he did not care. At that moment, he was 15 years old again, in Professor Mitchell's classroom, learning about history and about life. Do you remember that day? Robert asked, his voice firmer now. When you tried to make the varsity team? How could I forget? Michael responded. I was cut. They said I was too short, too skinny. It was the worst day of my life at that time. But you do not know the whole story, do you? Robert looked at him. You do not know what happened afterward. Michael shook his head. I went to talk to Coach Herring the next day, Robert recounted, and his voice gained a tone of nostalgia. I was young still. I was 28 years old. I thought I could make a difference in my students' lives. And I saw something special in you, Michael. It was not just about basketball. What did you see? True determination. You would stay after class, alone in the library, studying. Not because you were forced to, but because you wanted to learn. And in the gymnasium, I would see you training when you thought no one was watching. Robert smiled at the memory. You did not play for glory or to impress girls. You played because you loved that game with every fiber of your being. What did you say to the coach? I said it would be a mistake to leave you completely out of the program, that you had something that could not be taught, an unrelenting work ethic. I suggested they put you on the junior team, where you could develop without the pressure of varsity. Robert paused. It was not an easy conversation. Coach Herring was stubborn. But I insisted. I said that if he did not give you that chance, he would be making the biggest mistake of his career. Michael sat in silence, processing. He had always believed he had earned that spot on his own, that his fierce determination after the rejection was the only factor. And it was, in large part. But there was someone behind the scenes, someone fighting for him when he did not even know it. I never knew that, Michael said, his voice strained. I never even imagined it. It was not for you to know. I only wanted you to have your chance, and you seized every second of it. Robert laughed softly. I would see you training alone on the court after class. I would see you stay until the janitor practically had to throw you out. And I thought, this boy is going to surprise a lot of people. This boy is going to make history. And you were right. Yes, Robert laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. You went to North Carolina, then to the Bulls. 6 championships, the greatest of all time. It was almost 50 years since that day at Laney, and you surpassed everything I imagined. I would watch on TV whenever I could, and I felt proud, as if I had done a small part. So what happened? Michael asked gently. How did you end up here? Robert's smile disappeared. He looked at his hands, dirty and trembling slightly. Life happened, Michael. Life happened in ways I was not prepared to face. He breathed deeply. I continued teaching for many years. I loved my work. I married a wonderful woman, Linda. We had 2 children, David and Sarah. Life was good, simple, but full of meaning. What changed? 15 years ago, Linda died in a car accident. Robert's voice broke. A drunk driver ran a red light. She was coming back from the school where she also taught. She died on the way to the hospital. I am sorry. I collapsed. I did not know it at the time, but it was deep depression. I stopped sleeping right. I started drinking to be able to turn my mind off at night. At first, it was just 1 drink, then 2, then the whole bottle. Robert closed his eyes. I lost my job 2 years later. I could not teach anymore. I could not look at those children full of future when mine seemed to be over. I pushed my children away. They tried to help me in every way they could, but I was sinking too deep in my own pain. And your children now? I have not spoken to them in almost 10 years. Robert wiped a tear. David must be 35 years old now. Sarah, 32. How could I appear in their lives after all that? I was a teacher. I taught about responsibility, about making the right choices, and I made everything wrong. Michael placed his hand on Robert's shoulder. You did not make everything wrong. You gave me a chance when no one else was willing. You believed in me. And what good does that do me now? I helped you become a legend, but I could not keep my own life on the rails. No, Michael said firmly. This does not end here. You are going to rise. What? Stand up. You are going to get off this street. Today. Robert shook his head. Michael, I do not want your charity. I just wanted you to know that at some point in my life, I did something that was worth it. Just that. I just wanted someone to know. It is not charity. Michael looked directly into his eyes. It is gratitude. It is recognition. It is one man helping another man who once helped him. And you are going to let me do this. The small Italian restaurant was almost empty at that hour of the afternoon. Michael had deliberately chosen a discreet place, away from the curious eyes of downtown. He seated Robert at a table in the back and ordered several dishes. Robert ate slowly, but with the hunger of someone who had not had a decent meal in a very long time. Michael watched in silence, feeling a complex mixture of emotions: gratitude, guilt, responsibility. How had he not sought out the people who had helped him along the way? Go easy, Michael said gently. There is plenty of food. Robert stopped, embarrassed. Sorry, I have lost the habit of eating in places like this. You do not need to apologize for anything. Eat as much as you want. After that, we will sort out some practical things. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Finally, Robert wiped his mouth and looked at Michael with hesitation. Do you have family? Robert asked. I do. 5 children. Michael smiled, but there was sadness there too. I was not always the father I should have been. I was always traveling, always focused on basketball, then on business. I missed so much. But I am trying to be better now. You said you have 2, right? David and Sarah. Robert's eyes lit up briefly. David always wanted to be a doctor. Since childhood, he was always with those anatomy books. Sarah loved art. She painted beautiful paintings. She had so much talent. Why do you not try to talk to them? How could I? Robert shook his head vigorously. Look at me, Michael. I am a walking embarrassment. I taught about dignity, about overcoming difficulties, and look where I ended up. Do you think having success made me immune to problems? Do you think being famous means not suffering? Michael leaned forward. My first marriage ended. I was too absent, too focused on myself. My children grew up without me being there as I should have been. I chose championships over birthdays more times than I would like to admit. Robert looked at him, surprised. But you are Michael Jordan. On the courts, maybe. But off them? I am just a man who made mistakes. Like you. Michael breathed deeply. The only difference between us is that when I was falling, there was a net of people around me. Coaches, teammates, family, even when I did not deserve it. You lost your support network, and no one was there to hold you. I had my children, and I pushed them away. I yelled at them. I said horrible things when they tried to help. Then let us try to bring them back, slowly, one step at a time. Robert laughed without humor. It is too late for that. They hate me. They probably do not even want to know if I am alive or dead. Do you know who taught me not to be afraid to try? Michael smiled. A history teacher at Laney High School. He used to say something about failure not being the problem. The problem was not trying. Do you remember that? Robert froze. Tears began to roll silently down his face. I used to say that. You did. Several times. And those words carried me through impossible moments. When I broke my foot, and they said, maybe I would not play anymore. When we lost important games. When I thought about giving up. Michael felt his own emotions rising. I always went back to that. Try. Just try. The worst that can happen is you fail. And failing while trying is better than never trying. I do not know if I can face their rejection, Robert whispered. Then I will be there with you. Just like you were there for me when the coach would not give me a chance. Michael extended his hand across the table. But first, you need to accept real help. It is not just a meal and a night in a hotel. It is treatment. It is rehabilitation. It is therapy to process everything that happened. It is a real commitment to yourself. Robert looked at the extended hand. Decades of pain, years of shame. But there, in that simple gesture, a possibility he thought he had lost forever. Hope. Slowly, with a trembling hand, he held Michael's hand. I do not know if I deserve this, Robert said. No one deserves the suffering you endured. And everyone deserves a second chance. Michael squeezed his hand firmly. You gave me mine almost 50 years ago. Let me give you yours now. The people in the restaurant were noticing now. Michael Jordan, visibly emotional, holding the hand of a homeless man. Some took discreet photos. Others simply watched, sensing they were witnessing something important, even if they did not fully understand the context. But Michael did not care about any of that. At that moment, he was not a basketball legend. He was not a global icon. He was just a man of 61 years, paying a debt he took almost half a century to discover he had. And Robert, sitting there with tears running down his face, felt for the first time in 15 years that perhaps, just perhaps, his story did not have to end on those cold streets of Chicago. April of 2025. Lincoln Park, Chicago. Spring had finally arrived. The park was hard-eyed, full of renewed life. Children running among the flowering trees, dogs chasing frisbees, people having picnics on the green grass that had finally returned after the harsh winter. It was a striking contrast to that cold afternoon in October when Michael had found Robert. Robert Mitchell was sitting on a bench, his hands trembling slightly. Not from cold. The day was pleasant. It was pure nervousness. He was different from the man who lived on the streets 6 months ago. His hair was cut and his beard trimmed short. Simple, but clean clothes. He had gained some weight. His face was no longer hollow and sickly. But most importantly, his eyes had light again. There was still tiredness there, still pain. 6 months do not erase 15 years of suffering, but there was something more now. There was hope. Did they confirm they would come? Robert asked for the 5th time, his voice tense. Michael was seated next to him, dressed casually, cap and dark glasses to maintain some anonymity. Yes, they confirmed again yesterday. They are coming. The past 6 months had been brutally difficult. Rehabilitation was not just about stopping drinking. It was about facing everything Robert had buried under alcohol. The pain of loss, the guilt, the shame. Weeks in a clinic, then in a transitional program. Individual therapy 3 times a week. Support groups. Some days were good. Many days were terrible. Michael had kept his word. He visited when he could, at least once a week. Sometimes they just sat in silence. Other times they talked about basketball, about life, about regrets. Michael never judged. He was simply present. And now, this moment, the most difficult of all. It took 8 weeks to find David and Sarah through discreet investigators. Another 3 weeks of calls through a therapist, mediating initial conversations. Robert could not just call. There was too much hurt, too much resentment. The conversations began with the therapist explaining the situation, then evolved into short calls with Robert on the other end. The first conversations were horrible. David was furious, his words cutting. Sarah cried, unable to decide whether she felt anger or relief knowing her father was alive. But the therapist continued the work, session after session, helping everyone process complex layers of emotions. And now, after 6 months, they had agreed to meet in person. "What if they look at me and just leave?" Robert said, his voice breaking. "What if they cannot forgive me?" "Then you will respect that," Michael answered honestly. "You cannot control how they feel. You can only control how you act now." "I am afraid, Michael. More afraid than of anything in my life." "I know, but you are here, and that is already more than you managed to do in the past 10 years. Robert nodded, wiping his eyes, and then he saw them. 2 adults walking through the park toward him. David was tall, had his father's broad shoulders, the same dark eyes. Sarah was more delicate, had her mother's face, that same gentle smile Robert remembered of Linda. They stopped about 3 meters away. The silence was dense, heavy with years of unspoken words. Robert stood slowly, his legs almost failing. "What do you say to children you abandoned? How do you ask forgiveness for a decade of absence?" "Hi," Robert finally managed to say, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Hi, Dad," David responded. His voice was controlled, careful, as if he were treading on thin ice. Sarah said nothing. She just looked, tears already running silently down her face. Robert began, then stopped. He had rehearsed this 1,000 times with the therapist. But now, standing before them, all the words seemed inadequate. "I am not going to keep apologizing repeatedly. Not because I am not deeply sorry, but because I know sorry does not cover 10 years. It does not cover the suffering I caused. It does not cover the missed birthdays, the graduations I did not attend, the moments when you needed a father, and I was not there." David crossed his arms, his jaw tense. Sarah continued crying silently. "You have no obligation whatsoever to forgive me," Robert continued. "You tried to help me so many times, and I pushed you away. I said terrible things. I acted in unforgivable ways. I was drowning in my own pain, and I ended up dragging you with me." "So why now?" David asked, and there was real anger in his voice now. "Why after 10 years do you decide to show up? Where were you when Sarah had her first child? When I graduated from medical school? Where were you in all the important moments?" "On the streets," Robert answered simply, honestly, "living under bridges, drinking everything I could get to not feel anything, wishing I would die but without the courage to end it. I was in the darkest place a human being can be." "And that is an excuse?" David took a step forward, his fists clenched. "No, it is not an excuse. It is the truth. It is what happens when someone loses everything and has no structure to deal with it." Robert kept his gaze fixed on his son. "I am not asking you to understand. I know you cannot understand. I am just asking a chance to try to be a better person. To try, slowly, very slowly, to rebuild something." "Rebuild what?" Sarah finally spoke, her voice thin. You cannot rebuild 10 years, Dad. You cannot bring Grandma back. You cannot erase everything that happened. I know, daughter. I know. Robert felt his own tears. But perhaps we can build something new. Not what we had. That is gone. But perhaps something different. Bit by bit. If you want to. And if we do not want to, David challenged, then I will respect that. And I will continue treating myself. Continue trying to be a decent human being. Even if it is just for myself now. Robert breathed deeply. But I will keep waiting. Until my last day, I will wait in hope that perhaps, one day, you can give me a second chance. Michael, watching from afar, felt his own tears. He recognized that moment, that complete vulnerability, that fear of rejection. He had felt it many times in life in different ways. It was Sarah who moved first, not running like in a movie, but slowly, hesitantly. One step, then another. She stopped in front of her father, looking at that face she remembered, but which was so different now. You have a grandson, she said softly. Nathan, he is 3 years old. Robert sobbed. A grandson. And I do not know if I can forgive you yet. But, Sarah wiped her tears. But perhaps he deserves to know his grandfather. If you promise, you will stay. If you promise, you will not disappear again. I promise. I swear by everything that exists that I will try every single day. Sarah, after a moment of hesitation, hugged her father. It was not a tight hug. It was a careful hug, fragile, from someone afraid of getting hurt again. But it was a hug. David remained where he was, watching. Michael could see the war happening on his face, anger against love, resentment against hope. Finally, he took a step forward. I am not going to pretend that everything is okay, David said, his voice hard, because it is not. You destroyed our family. You made us suffer in ways you cannot even imagine. I know. But, David paused, struggling with the words. But Sarah is right. Perhaps we can try something new. Very slowly. With many rules. And if you step out of line once, it is over. Understood? Understood. And you are going to do therapy. And you are going to keep us informed of everything. And you are not just going to disappear when things get difficult. I will not. I promise. David finally joined the hug. It was awkward, tense, full of conflicting emotions. But it was real. Michael stood up discreetly, giving them space. As he walked away, Robert looked at him and made a gesture of thanks. Michael simply waved back. He walked through the park, hands in his pockets, reflecting. How many times in life does someone receive a true second chance? How many times can we manage to correct our deepest mistakes? His phone buzzed. It was a text from Robert, sent afterward. I have no words. You saved my life. Literally. Michael typed back, You saved mine first. Now we are even. But he knew they were not even. They never would be. Because what Robert had done, believe in a 15-year-old boy that no one else believed in, was priceless. There was no way to repay it adequately. All Michael could do was pay it forward. It was to be present. It was to use his influence and resources to make a difference where he could. 9 months later, September of 2025. Robert Mitchell was standing in front of a classroom in a school on the south side of Chicago. Not as a regular teacher. Those days had passed, but as part of a program for at-risk youth, where people who had experienced extreme difficulties came to share their stories. My name is Robert Mitchell, he began. his voice clear and firm. And 1 year ago, I was living on the streets, without hope, without future, thinking my life had ended. The approximately 20 teenagers in the room watched him, some with skepticism, others with genuine curiosity. I lost everything: my career, my family, my dignity. I drank for 15 years trying to forget the pain of my wife's death. And in the process, I lost another 10 years without talking to my children. He walked through the room, making eye contact with each student. I taught history in this city for decades, and I always told my students one thing: the greatest mistake is not failing. It is not trying. He smiled sadly. And then I stopped trying. I gave up completely. And do you know what happens when you give up? Life swallows you whole. A girl raised her hand. How did you get off the streets? I found someone I had helped many years ago. Someone I did not even remember anymore. But he remembered me. And he showed me that it is never too late for a second chance. That no matter how deep you have fallen, you can always start climbing again. Who was it? A boy asked. Robert hesitated. Michael had asked for discretion, did not want this to become a media story. Someone who became very successful. But the name does not matter. What matters is the lesson. Never underestimate the impact you can have on someone's life. One act of kindness, one word of encouragement, believing in someone when no one else believes? Another student raised her hand. And your children? Did they forgive you? We are working on that, bit by bit. It is a long and painful process. It is not like in the movies, where everything is resolved in 2 minutes. Robert was honest. But I see my grandson now, Nathan, and my daughter lets me pick him up from school sometimes. And my son calls me once a week. It is not what it was before. It will never be. But it is something new, and I am grateful for every second. Do you still drink? A boy in the back asked. No. I completed 8 months sober last week. Every day is a choice. Some days are easier. Many days are difficult. But I make the choice every day to try to be better than I was yesterday. The class continued for another 40 minutes. Robert answered questions with brutal honesty. He hid nothing. He did not romanticize his fall or his recovery. He was real. When it ended, as students left, a young girl approached. She was shy, her eyes red as if she had cried during the talk. "Mr. Mitchell," she said quietly, "my mother, she drinks. A lot. And I do not know how to help her." Robert knelt down to be at her height. "What is your name?" "Emma." "Emma, sometimes you cannot save people, no matter how much we love them." He pulled a card from his pocket. "But this is the number of a support center for families. They have groups for children of parents with addictions. You cannot force your mother to change, but you can take care of yourself. And sometimes, when we take care of ourselves, the people around us notice and start wanting to change too." Emma took the card, tears running down her face. "Thank you." After she left, Robert stood alone in the room for a moment. He looked at the poster on the wall, a motivational quote about perseverance. It was not about Michael Jordan, but it could have been. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Sarah. "Nathan is asking when Grandpa will come to dinner again. How about Friday?" Robert smiled, tears of gratitude in his eyes. He typed back, "I would not miss it for anything in the world." As he walked out of the school, the sun set over Chicago. Robert Mitchell, former homeless person, former teacher, now in continuous recovery, looked at the orange sky and thought about everything that had happened in the past year. A life can change in one moment. It can collapse in a second. But it can also be rebuilt, brick by brick, day by day. It never becomes what it was. But it can become something new. He thought of Michael, the thin 15-year-old boy he believed had potential. The 61-year-old man who returned that faith decades later. And he thought of the most important lesson of all. Believing in someone is the greatest gift you can give. And that gift can echo through decades, saving lives in ways you would never imagine. Robert smiled at the sky, whispering a silent thank you for the second chance, for rediscovered hope, for knowing that never, never is it too late to begin again, and for learning that the true legacy is not the accomplishments we accumulate, but the lives we touch along the way.